status of dative case in the Moksha case paradigm.
I don't have permission to share my screen. Oh, thank you. Actually, I have a question. Does anyone need me to speak English, or I can speak Russian? Okay, just in case, I'll probably speak English. Today I'm going to talk about the status of dative case in the Moksha case paradigm. The issue is that based on affix order and morphological encoding of number and definiteness, cases in Moksha, Finno-Ugric language, can be divided into two groups. One group is possession plus case order, and number and definiteness can be encoded. These are nominative, genitive, accusative, and dative cases. And the other group is all the rest of the cases, which is case plus possession order, and number or definiteness can never be encoded. And we would like to explain this difference, and what would be handy is that there is a very important theoretical distinction in formal linguistic between structural cases and inherent cases, but there is a problem. The latter group, this one, corresponds to inherent cases, while the former is heterogeneous. So there are structural cases such as nominative and genitive accusative, and an inherent case dative. So dative has this weird behavior. And why does dative pattern with structural cases and not with inherent cases? And this is problematic. So I have a proposal which consists of three main points that actually need to be posed independently of that. So nominative and genitive accusative are genuine case forms, and dative and other inherent case forms include and are the line P head, like adpositional head, rather than a bona fide case exponent. And why are P heads heterogeneous? So there are two types of heads with different morphosyntactic properties in Moksha. Type 1, which take bare form, and type 2, which take genitive form. I'll talk about it. And the difference between two groups of P heads is in their relational versus non-relational nature. That's basically my approach. And the answer to the question will be that dative patterns with structural cases because it's a non-relational P head of type 2. And its structure actually kind of contains genitive morphosyntactically. So after introducing language and data and providing some theoretical background, we will dive into basics of nominal morphosyntax, discuss two types of P heads, and I'll show you predictions based on my analysis and revised Moksha case system, and draw conclusions. So yeah, the language is Moksha, probably you're all familiar with it, spoken in Russia, Republic of Mordovia, and my data sources, alongside with my own fieldwork notes, I use the grammatical description created within the same project I was part of during my field trips. The most important notion is the distinction between structural and inherent cases that was proposed in formal literature. Basically, structural cases are mostly the subject and direct object cases, while inherent cases are those that are related to like semantics more. So another important thing is that inherent cases that are related to semantics and adpositions are seen by many researchers as the instances of the same category P, category of prepositions and adpositions. And particularly some people propose that they are like those so-called case markers are actually exponents of these P heads instead of freestanding adpositions. And what is also important to me is an NP-DP distinction. So I assume that the structure of the noun phrase is hierarchical. It contains the noun itself and different functional heads responsible for number or possession. But the thing is that not all projections have to be present in a noun phrase. For example, there are small nominals. For example, just a noun phrase can be present without those functional guys. So noun phrases don't need case. They're small. They can be there. This will be important. So keeping this in mind, let's move to the basics of Moksha morphosyntax. First of all, as I already mentioned, the affix order in two groups of cases is different. So in genitive, accusative, and dative, first we see possessive agreement and then case, as you can see in 3 and 4. So here is the possessive agreement, here is the case exponent. But on the other hand, in the other case forms, it's the opposite. First we see the case, and then possessive agreement. That's first thing. Then case and number. So number is expressed in nominative, genitive, accusative, and dative. So you can see in 7 and 8 that 7 in nominative, for example, based on this possessive marker, which is cumulative with number, we can tell for sure whether the noun phrase is singular or plural. The same, exactly the same is for dative in 8, we can tell. But in 9, which is inessive and inherent case, there is no number distinction. We cannot tell whether this is one village or several villages. Then moving to case and definiteness. So again, only nominative, genitive, accusative, and dative have definite forms. Let's look at the table 1, which is a fragment of Moksha case paradigm. You can see that only the 3 first cases have definite declension forms, which is basically like definiteness markers and number again. So like both definiteness and number. All the rest doesn't have this. And in order to express definiteness, more or less in other cases, we use constructions with freestanding postpositions like in 10, pheads, esse, because we cannot put both definiteness and a case in one marker. The last morphosyntactic property that distinguishes between the two groups is that possessive agreement with third-person possessors, which are not personal pronouns. Personal pronouns have their own rules, is only obligatory in, again, nominative, genitive, accusative, and dative. So you can see like in genitive, there is here possessor, and possessive agreement on the head is obligatory. We can't just without it. The same is with dative, again, the same possessor. Again, possessive agreement is obligatory, but in illative and inherent case, even though like 12 and 13 are a minimal pair with the same meaning, here it's an option to omit possessive agreement. So these are differences of the two groups, but we can see that even though we want like dative is not a structural case, it's an inherent case functionally, it patterns exactly like other inherent cases. So what's the problem? Probably I have to prove that dative is not a structural case. Well, if we've compare the functions of those cases, we can see that, for example, genitive accusative behaves like a structural case. It marks all nominal dependents, like in 14, there is possessor, but like whatever nominal dependent you have will be in genitive. Complements of postpositions. So if you have a postposition, its complement will be in genitive, whatever happens. And direct objects in transitive construction, which is canonical structural case situation, like in 16. So dative, on the contrary, is mostly indirect objects like recipients or goals, Like here in 17, we have this flowers to my daughter. We can express this with dative, or we can express this as a go, like a directional case, entered my house, like entered to my house, literally. Another function of dative is external arguments of passive. For example, this has been dug by Vasya. So this is like a by phrase in English. So again, this is a canonical thing for inherent cases. Well, there are like some other functions of dative, but like there is no way for us to think that actually dative is a structural case in Moksha, so that this patterns with structural cases because of that. Also, we cannot passivize like dative things. So all the tests that are normally for to show that this is a structural case, like they're problematic for dative. But what I say is that actually dative and other inherent cases are all P's in opposition to other cases. But the thing is why dative is different from other inherent cases is that there are two types of P heads. Let's look at those types. They have different morphosyntactic properties. P heads of type 1. First of all, they cannot have complements that are marked with indefinite genitive, like here. So I cannot say Moksha, I can only say Moksha. So they require, with indefinite noun phrases, they require bare complements and P complements. And also, if we have this thing here, Lanksa, we can have possessive agreement with a definite genitive complement. So here you see a definite genitive complement, and there is possessive agreement on the head. If we move to P heads of type 2, actually what we see is that complements are only marked, like indefinite complements, are only marked with indefinite genitive, and we cannot have this bare form with normal, like other type of P heads. So yeah, there are no bare noun phrase complements, and actually no possessive agreement unless this is a pronominal complement. I will talk about it a little bit later. So with non-pronominal noun phrases, there is no possessive agreement on the head, on the P head. So actually, if we look at P heads, freestanding P heads in Moksha, we see that they are strikingly different. Type 1 has bare complements and possessive agreement with DPs in genitive, and type 2 have indefinite genitive complements and no agreement with DPs in genitive. So what's the difference between the two types of P heads? And here what is important is this distinction between relational and non-relational nouns. So typologists have been distinguishing nouns that have an internal argument as relational nouns. For example, look at like those that denote spatial relations, like top of the tree. There is this relational noun top, and it has an internal argument of the tree. And yeah, in some languages, relational nouns can have special properties, setting them apart from the regular nouns like table. And actually what we know about the grammaticalization process of those things, so relational nouns often develop into postpositions, and postpositions can develop into inherent cases. Look at this nice hierarchy. So relational noun, then adpositions, and then cases. Although I argue that the path from a relational noun to a case affix via a postposition stage is less straightforward than it seems, because we have relational nouns that finally lead to case markers with properties type 1, and non-relational postpositions that lead to property case markers with properties type 2. And I will show you that actually Moksha distinguishes between grammaticalized relational nouns like adpositions and genuine postpositions that are non-relational. So those two types will lead to different types of inherent cases. Let's look at my analysis now. It looks pretty simple based on what I have said now. So inherent case forms in Moksha include pheads. And these case forms inherit their morphosyntactic properties from relational nouns and postpositions. Inherent cases other than dative come from relational nouns. Thank you. And I argued elsewhere how this happens. But basically, we can look at the structure. So we have a bare complement with a freestanding relational noun, which looks like this. Look, inherent case looks more or less the same. So what is important about the order of possessive markers and case markers is that, again, with freestanding relational nouns, possessor of the complement will trigger agreement on the phead. So it will be on top of P, not inside the DP, because there is no DP, it's an NP. So possessor will trigger agreement on the head. And the same, again, we see on in the situation of so-called inherent case markers. So it will follow the case marker because of this structure. So it's on top of the P. So bare noun phrase complements, then no genitive marker or on the indefinite complement. And the structure we see like there is just se, it's not kudinse. And the order is derived. We don't talk about definite complements here because they're irrelevant. They only take bare noun phrases. Now, dative comes from non-relational postpositions. Why do I assume that? So, well, first of all, diachronically, we know that there is this postpositional origin of T and D affixes, as reported by, for example, Serebrennikov following Bubrich. And there are some synchronic traces, like synchronic evidence about postpositional nature of dative. Look at the pronominal paradigm. So genuine postpositions take pronominal complements, like in 29. The complement is in genitive, and there is a possessive agreement. So as I said, like pronominals have their own rules. So genuine postpositions do agree with their pronominal complements. And dative in their pronominal paradigm looks exactly like postposition. So there is this element that takes this genitive complement and there is agreement on the head. And we can omit this genitive complement. So there are like two forms in pronominal dative paradigm that are actually a postposition. So if dative is a non-relational head, we expect a genitive complement of this P head. And what we see actually in the paradigm, dative markers properly contain genitive markers. So if we look at the paradigm, every time we see a little bit of genitive in the dative. So it's like T and D is just added to genitive marker, because morphosyntactically, like genitive complement is of this P head that is dative. I have some trees, so yeah, we need to have this genitive NP or like DP before the genuine postposition. The same is with dative case. And again, with possessor, we need to have a DP because it's not an NP with possessor somewhere. We need to have a DP with agreement where the agreement with genitive is. This derives as the possessive possession plus case order for dative as well as for genitive. So my conclusions. So even though Moksha shows a surprising grouping of cases based on their morphosyntactic properties, dative behaves like structural case and not as an inherent case, contrary to expectations. I argue that dative is an inherent case based on functions and its overall syntactic behavior in the language, but the morphosyntactic properties that I use for case for grouping are sensitive to not to the functions of cases, but to relational versus non-relational nature of pheads. And also additionally, I show that the nature of postposition, whether it's relational or non-relational, doesn't become irrelevant in the course of grammaticalization to case. Remember, it was like from relational noun via postposition. So if it's a postposition, it still contains its origins properties, whether it's from relational noun or from some other source. So the relational properties will be transmitted to the later stage of case and will not be lost on the stage of being a postposition. Yes, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Yes, we have 10 minutes for questions. Please, Irina, your question.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for the talk. Really great. Two questions slash suggestions. So the first one is, it's about those possessors, right? Like in the construction with the relational noun, you suggested that the possessor is just base generated on top of the p head. Because the nominal complement is very small, it's just an NP, right? I mean,
yeah, but
I like the syntax. I'm not that sure about the semantics of this. So maybe instead you can consider an alternative where the possessor, for example, is generated in the complement of NP or like inside the NP, but it cannot be licensed there, as you said, right? The NP is too small. And then it has to move to a higher post-P projection. I think that would just make maybe semantics a little bit nicer, because right now the possessor is generated too high, and I mean, why would it be there? What would trigger its introduction? You know.
Yeah, can I answer? Because I think like I asked you the same question during your talk, and what you answered me is exactly what I'm going to answer to you now. Like I was just, it's like my wording was not clear. So yeah, I do assume that semantically it is somehow inside the NP, but there is no like space for syntax such that it has to end up in a position higher. It's licensed by its P,
yeah. So I think that like those analyses that suggest that the possessor is generated in a complement position, they can be really helpful here. So basically, the possessor is a part of this NP even maybe, but then it is licensed in a higher projection. So that
yeah, so it can like it is generated, but there is no space within the yeah. Yeah, thank you for I have to be more explicit about it.
Yeah, and my second concern was about this whole like dative is inherent story. I kind of believed your arguments, but I think maybe you should still address somehow this alternative analysis where dative is a structural case assigned by the applicative head, because it feels like most of those cases for dative that you listed can actually be analyzed in terms of an applicative structure.
But I'm not sure that
no argument
that we have the same theory in mind.
So I mean, a structural case is a case assigned by a functional head, right? So
yeah, but inherent case, if we assume like Leggett's theory about non-structural cases, she divides inherent to inherent properly and lexical cases. So inherent cases here are actually also associated, like they are assigned by functional heads, but they are associated with semantics, with theta roles. So based on that, like even though it wouldn't be like lexical case, it would still be an inherent case.
But then, like, if it's still assigned by a functional head, right? Then I don't understand the connection to this P head then. Because I thought at first that it's just like no case at all. It's just a P head if it's inherent in your story. But now you're saying that if it's inherent, it's still assigned by a functional head.
So I say that inherent cases, actually all these guys, lexical and inherent cases, are not just simple DPs with some case feature. Actually, instead of assigning, like, because of the theta role, an inherent case, the verb just selects for a PP.
Yeah, and that brings me back to my argument, because I feel like most cases, most contexts where dative appears that you listed, they may be accounted for in terms of an applicative structure. So it's not the verb that somehow requires this dative, but it's this apple P and this apple head that assigns structural, basically, dative case, similarly to how little V head assigns like dative functional, or like P head assigns nominative. So maybe if it's like a longer paper, maybe you can address that alternative approach in an appendix or something.
Yeah, thank you. I will try. Although, like, I don't see how applicative head cannot, why it cannot assign select for a PP in it. Because ergative is also an inherent case in the theory I'm working in. So
to some people, yeah.
Yeah, but thank you. I need to talk more about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Does someone else have more questions? If no, so we should tell thank you to Polina. И на этом, собственно, сегодняшний день у нас закончен. Напоминаю, что завтра у нас немножко позже начинаются доклады, то есть в половину 12-го первый доклад будет, не в 11, а в половину 12-го. Спасибо всем за участие.